Hi, my name is Brian Reeder. Many of you will know me from my work with poultry, and others may know me from my work with daylilies. This video is to introduce you to the channel and to give you a little bit of a description about what the channel is going to be about and what I'm going to focus on. Welcome to the Art of Breeding with Brian Reeder. I have a script prepared that I was going to kind of try to subtly read, but I've tried doing that a couple of times and it just feels very static and stiff to me. So I'm still going to use that. You'll see me glancing over to it occasionally, but I'm going to use it as an outline, and what I want to try to accomplish is to go through it and make it feel a little conversational so you don't feel like you're being read to. So to begin with, the channel will be looking at various aspects of breeding and genetics for domestic plants and animals. Okay, that's the main thrust of the whole thing. I've worked with daylilies, I've worked with chickens extensively, I've worked with goldfish, I've worked with snakes, specifically North American colubrids. I've also worked with a wide range of other odds and ends here and there that I never got as in depth with as other things. Guppies. I kept Highland cattle and bred those for a while. None of those things panned out to be long-term, though, like the work with the chickens. But what I want this channel to be is a focus on all of it. Okay? I don't want to just focus on one narrow thing, because when I look at breeding, I don't see any difference in it. Yes, the individual details about the specific genes of daylilies may be different from the specific genes of chickens, and the chicken genes may be different from the specific genes of goldfish, and they may be different from the specific genes of the North American colubrid snakes. But all in all, the breeding processes are exactly the same. You're still using the same box of tools. You're still using the same toolkit in order to accomplish good breeding practice. So that's kind of what I want to focus on. I grew up on a farm. In fact, I grew up on the farm I still live on, and I was exposed to domestic animals and plants from my earliest years. I knew early on that I wanted to work with plants and animals. I didn't know it in those exact words, of course. I just knew that there was something special and appealing to me about plants and animals and working with the domestic animals, the domestic plants. There was always some allure to that. There was something really exciting about it for me that seemed to be more exciting for me than for most people I knew. I spent much of my childhood keeping a wide range of animals and growing various garden plants, but there were four that I held in the highest of esteem. They were the ones that I always came back to. And of course, originally it was chickens. From my very earliest memories of childhood, it was chickens. And then also in those early memories were bearded irises and daylilies. Now, when I was a little older, by the time I started having my own chickens, when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, at about that same time I got my first fancy daylily plants, and it just went from there. I got my first goldfish when I was just a little bit older, probably like 8 or 9, and I think guppies were actually the very first aquatics that I had, and then the goldfish came just a year or two later, and guppies have always been the runner-up to goldfish. Then the colubrid snakes came later and really started more with like pythons and boas, and then grew into colubrid snakes through my teen years. And I bred snakes quite a bit, and then during the time that I was doing poultry research, I also did a research project with the North American colubrid snakes. With the goldfish, I bred them as well, but I didn't breed them as heavily. Mostly what I ended up doing with goldfish was just breeding them here and there as a teenager, whenever I would have some that would breed, or maybe I would hibernate a set and then breed them. But in my 20s and 30s, I did some specific projects to look at their genetics. With the chickens, I actually did research work with them starting in about the late 1980s into the early 1990s. It really kicked off in about 93, 94. I did research work with them quite heavily until about 2008. Now, during that whole time, I had grown daylilies, and I knew that I kept thinking to myself as I observed daylilies over the decades that they were changing. I saw things I would want to change in them. I remember seeing that these plants perform beautifully and have lots of branches, tall scapes. lots of flowers, while this cultivar over here has a beautiful flower, but it doesn't bloom as well. And I always had in the back of my mind, if I could work with daylilies, there's this group of traits that I would want to change in them. So in 2008, when I had finished up my work with the domestic chickens, I then began to actually build a daylily breeding program that really kicked off about 2010. In 2006, I wrote the book, An Introduction to Color Forms of the Domestic Fowl. And then in 2009, I wrote the book, An Introduction to Form and Feathering of the Domestic Fowl. A lot of you will know me through those books or through my other work with poultry. After 2008, I moved over to the daylilies. By 2011, I started writing a daylily blog, which is the Daylily Breeder blog, daylilybreeder.blogspot.com. And you can find a lot of my writings I recorded there from the very beginning of my program, to sort of articulate what I wanted to do with the daylilies, what I wanted my program to become, what my long-term goals were. Later on, when I started introducing daylilies, I went on to build a website, sundragondaylilies.com. That's where I offer my introductions that are for sale. Some of you will also know me from the consultation work that I do with individual clients with plant and animal breeding programs. Starting in the early 90s, my poultry work actually began as I was just going to breed chickens, and it built into, then I want to breed new varieties, and then with just a couple of years I started to encounter disease problems that sent me off onto a research program of immunogenetics, which is the study of genetic disease resistance. And that was the main thrust of my work all the way up to 2008. We'll discuss some of that in more depth in later videos. From that work, though, I branched out, and because I was having to cross different breeds of chickens when I would find one that had the genetic resistance genes, you couldn't just go out and get a breed that had all those genes. You had to get a bird from here and a bird from there and a bird from here and cross them together. And I was already interested in crossing to make new varieties, so since I was going to have to cross, I set that up into little research projects, where I could study the genes and figure out how the genes worked, and I could confirm things from the published literature. Unlike daylilies or snakes, or even goldfish for that matter, there's a lot of published scientific research on the individual genes of chickens. So there was a body of knowledge there I could already access. But what I then did was see if I could confirm that or refute that, or add to that. Through that work, I was able to discover a factor that was not really known. People might say little known, but it was never fully explored, and that is the autosomal pheomelanin factor in the chickens, as well as its inhibitor, the inhibitor of autosomal pheomelanin, which when homozygous knocks out the autosomal pheomelanin. That is a body of my research that is unique to myself. After studying the colors, I started to realize that the colors could not all have just come from the red jungle fowl. There was more going on than just red jungle fowl. That led me to start looking into origins and domestication and hybridization. And these were subjects that had always interested me, but suddenly I started to look at this much more seriously, and so I started to research things like the Becazar, which are crosses of green jungle fowl with either red jungle fowl or domestic chickens. Later, the paper came out showing that the yellow skin gene is very closely related in chickens to the yellow skin gene of the gray jungle fowl. It's not identical, but it's very close to it. Originally, when I would publish and write articles about my thoughts on the origin of chickens, I got a lot of pushback on that. But in the years since, there's been a lot of information come forth, a lot of research come out that shows that, yes, the chicken is predominantly red jungle fowl, but it also has an extraction coming from the other three jungle fowl species, mostly in the nuclear DNA. So the base is red jungle fowl, then with little extractions of nuclear DNA from the other three jungle fowl. And many of the phenotypes we know in chickens derive from the hybridization events that happened a long time ago. This would have been, perhaps millennia ago. In doing that, though, I wanted to find a model organism where I could look at the earliest phases of domestication. And that led me to the North American colubrid snakes. Now, I had bred them, things like corn snakes and keen snakes. I had bred for a long time. They were something I had been interested in since I was a teenager. But I started to stumble upon research that showed that these could all be hybridized. And not a hybrid like a mule, even though there's occasionally fertile mules. This notion that all hybrids are sterile is false. But when you hybridize some of these North American colubrid snakes, you get 100% fertility, there's no deformity in the offsprings, and they're completely viable, which gave me a window to start making some of these hybrids myself and picking up from other people who had made them hybrids, start integrating those together and see what those earliest phases of domestication look like. So I did a little research project with that for a number of years. And after about 6 years of that, I was able to see that the F1 hybrids have a certain genetic reality. Second, third, fourth generation, each generation on down start to blend and blur more. And by the time you're getting to fifth, sixth, seventh generation, you're starting to see them become like what we would recognize from poultry as land races. And then out from that, you can then start to pull them into the directions of breeds. In other words, what happens is they start to become genetically stable. And if you apply selection, they can become as genetically stable as a breed. So that gave me a window and insight into the early phases of domestication of the jungle fowl. And of course, that domestication of jungle fowl led to the chickens. Okay, throughout all of this, I was playing with various breeds of goldfish. I made test matings to understand how the phenotypes work. Goldfish are possibly tetraploids, and I was very curious to see if I could find some information that would support that. And I think that, especially in terms of like the nacreous scale formation, that I found good information that goldfish may well be tetraploid. These are all things we'll cover in time on the channel. Along the way, I've dabbled with a lot of other plants and animals, and I have been obsessed with learning about genetics, both specific and general. From early childhood and throughout all the research work, one of the main things I dabbled with was growing daylilies. I've grown them since I was about 6 years old in the 1970s, and I've been adding new cultivars every few years. And once I finished working with the animals, I wanted to move into something a little less interactive. I was tired of being bitten and chased and attacked and having dust thrown all over me and just generally dealing with things that can move around, that have to be chased down. Plants are calmer, tamer, easier to work with, and so I chose to just pull myself over to that, and it was something I had always wanted to do. And so in the daylilies, I have spent the last 13 years, when was it? It started in 2008, so it's actually about 16 years since I began conceptualizing the program, and I began gathering plants in 2010, so that's about 15 years, and in 2011 was when I began actually intentionally breeding. So there's about 14 years of hands-on breeding work. Now, what I have found is that through that time, even though the genes aren't known specifically, I've gotten a pretty good handle on how certain of the genes work. And that's something I want to share with you on this channel as well, and that I want to kind of work through. So from 2008 forward, I started on the daylilies, and I've never looked back. In the daylilies, I have replicated both immunogenetic work and visual phenotype work, as I had done with the chickens. A garden daylily is a thing of hybrid origin, so this too falls in line with my previous research. Hybrid garden daylilies, as the gene pool assembled initially from the hybridization of various Hemerocallis species about a century ago, are still in the early phases of their domestication process. Which a lot of daylily people don't seem to realize, that as keeping these garden plants and making these hybrids, we're domesticating them. This is domestication. And it's exciting because the daylily was only made about 110, 120 years ago. The domestic hybrid daylily was begun at that time. Garden daylilies were begun being created by A.B. Stout and others seriously in the 1920s and 30s. And so we're looking at something that's a little over a century in, so we're still in the early phases of hybridization, but we're much further in than that 4, 5, 6 generations from species that I looked at with the snakes and that I was seeking to replicate information concerning the jungle fowl in. So it's very exciting to me to be working at this earlier phase of domestication after having worked with something like chickens that are millennia from their domestication, to having studied the snakes that are at the very beginning of their domestication, to something like the daylilies that are about a century into domestication. That's not something that will be very exciting to most people, but it's very exciting to me. And it's something I'm going to be sharing here, my thoughts on it, my thoughts on domestication and hybridization in general. The science, though, is not my only motivation, nor is it the only area where I draw inspiration. I am also an artist. I was very fortunate to be raised by women who encouraged my interests both in the sciences and the arts. My mother bought a set of encyclopedias for my brother and myself when I was about 4 years old, and I devoured them, especially anything related to sciences or the arts. In short, I crave knowledge. Art, beauty, and an interface with the natural world, both as an artist and as a scientist. Later, when I was about 10 years old, I discovered the Dune series of science fiction books by Frank Herbert, and they reinforced many of my interests, genetics, breeding, mythology, but those books also introduced me to another area of interest that would deeply influence me throughout my life, and that was philosophy, and specifically philosophical Taoism. Philosophical Taoism is not a religion, even though there is a religious Taoism. It's just a way of seeing and interfacing with the world, and it is very amenable to scientific research and to art. So it's had a strong influence, and that then has had a strong influence on how I work with science and genetics and breeding programs. And I want to share that because I think it's possible to bring all the areas of your life in together and create a holistic whole that will allow you to sort of incorporate everything you're interested in your life and not have to have these separate compartments where everything's off by itself. So what I hope to bring to you with this channel is knowledge, specifically knowledge of how to apply genetics to animal and plant captive breeding programs. Something I've found over the years is that I have a good ability to discuss genetic concepts in a manner that makes them accessible to hobbyists without a science background. My books on poultry genetics are good examples of this, as they take the complicated subject of genetics and distill it down in such a way that hobbyists can access it and make use of it in their own breeding programs. And that's what I hope to be able to do for you with this channel as well. I don't want this to be just a channel just for scientists. I want this to be a channel for anyone with an interest in breeding anything, no matter what their background is. Maybe you're a housewife and you don't know the difference between a dominant and recessive gene. Maybe you're someone in school who's wanting to learn more about these subjects. Maybe you're an advanced scientist. Maybe you've got a little bit of science knowledge and a whole lot of experience. Maybe you don't have any of it. Whatever level you're at, I want you to be able to gain value from this program that you can take and apply to what you're doing in the real world. And let all your interests color that. Bring all of your influences to bear so that you can create something unique to yourself. Here I will offer you specific information on chicken genetics, daylily breeding, goldfish genetics, and hybridization of North American colubrids. But not just that. I will be creating video series on specific subjects that you can access through the playlists here on my channel. I will also create videos that deal with more general subjects such as genetics and breeding programs, specific breeding systems, methods, and approaches, domestication, and hybridization. I will also look at aesthetics, art, and philosophy, how those subjects have influenced my work with breeding and genetics, and how you can apply your interests to your breeding program. My experience is that doing this makes for a more holistic approach to life, allowing for a broader view, a deeper insight, combining everything you do together into one. I'm excited to begin this journey, and I hope you will benefit from your time here on my channel. So that's basically, you can tell I read some of that, but I really wanted to get some of these points in, and I would ramble on for, we're 20 minutes in right now, 21 minutes. I would have rambled on for 40 or 50 minutes or 2 hours and still not gotten all of that in if I hadn't read some of it. I don't want to try to present this as some professional, polished channel where everything looks like PBS. That's nice for PBS, no shade on them, but I want this to be something where it's me, the real person here, conveying this information to you. And sometimes I may have to read something, because sometimes I may not remember. I'll get in front of the camera and immediately blank out. I have a good memory except in front of a camera. So at times I'll be reading, at times I'll just be speaking to you. But my hope for this channel is to be able to convey useful, accessible information that you can apply to breeding programs with plants and animals in whatever way you want to work with those. Feel free to let me know what you'd be interested in the comments section. Let me know where your interests lie. That'll help me to kind of shape the channel as I go along. And be sure, as things get going, to check out the playlists, because I will have playlists for specific areas of interest. So if it's snakes only, chickens only, daylilies only, goldfish only, whatever it is for you, if it's just that and that's all you want to know, you'll be able to find that in the playlist. There'll also be playlists for these more general topics. Thank you for visiting my channel. I hope this video was interesting to you. If you would like to know more about this subject, leave a comment or question below in the comments section. Please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell notification to be alerted when new videos post. You can find my poultry books on Amazon at the link below in the show notes. My daylily website, sundragondaylilies.com, offers information on booking me for consultations on your specific genetics questions or mentoring for your breeding projects. It also lists all of my daylily introductions, the cultivars that are currently available, and links to my blog where you can find the bulk of my daylily writing. Thank you for joining me for this video, and I hope you'll be back for more. Have a great day.